Cartier has been on the rise in recent years, capturing more global market share alongside rising prices at auction and in the online secondary market. We'll look at which models have climbed the highest. Next, the watches you'd like now may not be the same watches you'd like 10 years from now. See if you can guess which models are more popular for people in their 30s versus their 40s. Finally, we're taking a look at watch buying habits in the East versus the West. What are the regional preferences for precious metals, larger watches, this brand, that brand? We'll see what the data reveals. Welcome to Time is Money, where the clock is always ticking and money is always moving. We're taking a monthly look at the economic side of the watch world, and we appreciate you joining us. I'm Thomas Hendricks with Chrono24 in New York City. Let's look at 3 signs of the times for August 2022. But first, big news. Chrono24 is doing a giveaway for a Rolex Submariner date, reference 116610LN. The competition is open to new and existing users, and you can find out more in the description below. Much has been said about the meteoric rise and recent descent of secondary watch prices for Rolex, Patek Philippe, and Audemars Piguet. One brand that has seen success, although more quietly, is Cartier. The jeweler of kings and the king of jewelers has been gaining in the primary market and has seen increased attention in the secondary market, both online and at auction. Morgan Stanley published their annual analysis of watch sales and exports, and while Rolex remains number one by a strong margin, Cartier watches have dethroned Omega for the first time in years. The Parisian brand saw a 40% year-over-year increase from 2020 to 2021. And the report credits Cartier's ascension to its ability to connect with younger buyers. Looking to the secondary market, there's been a heightened focus in collector circles and non-collector circles surrounding vintage Cartier, with premium pricing for things like Paris styles, the CP series, and of course the Cartier Crash. Friend of the channel and gentleman dealer Eric Wind of Wind Vintage has been stocking more Cartier than at any point in his business's history. And speaking of the Crash, you may remember the site Loop This, setting the auction record for Cartier in May of 2022. They sold a 1967 Cartier Crash from the London boutique for a hammer price of $1.5 million. A couple years ago, for reference, Cartier Crashes, albeit those from the 80s and 90s, typically fetched around $100,000 to $200,000 at auction. For those of us that don't have $1.5 million lying around, let's look at what other Cartiers are selling well. 3 tank submodels make up the majority of tank sales on Chrono24, and those are in order: the Tank Française, the Tank Solo, and the Tank Americaine. For the Santos, we see a similar spread with the Santos Galbé, the current production 35mm Santos, and the Santos 100, making up the majority of sales for that model. Funny enough, each watch I just mentioned is about the same price as one Cartier Love bracelet. Let's wrap this up by discussing the Tank Basculante. The hinged model has seen a boom in popularity on Instagram, and that's translated to higher secondary market prices as well. Prices on Chrono24 for the manually wound, reference 2390, were as flat as can be from 2014 to 2020. Then they shot up starting in late 2020, rising more than 250% over an 18-month period. Pricing peaked around $10K in February of this year and now sits closer to $9K. You ever seen a photo of yourself from 10 years ago and think, what was I wearing? And who approved that haircut? Thankfully, watch purchases are often less regretful, but tastes can and do change over time. We've crunched the numbers to find the top 10 most popular watches on Chrono24 for buyers in their 30s and those in their 40s. Do you have your finger on the pulse of the market? Let's see if you can guess which watch matches up with each age group. First up, we have the Speedmaster Reduced and the Speedmaster Racing. The data says younger buyers prefer the Reduced and older buyers prefer the Racing Edition. This reflects a larger trend whereby younger buyers will purchase more mainstream models, while more seasoned buyers will gravitate towards more niche references. We see the same thing with 30-something buyers preferring the more classic Nomos Tangente reference 139, and 40-something buyers opting for the more complicated Nomos Tangente Neomatic 41 update, that's reference 180. Next up, we have a Breitling matchup with the Navitimer 806 against the Breitling Colt A17035. Data says younger buyers prefer the Colt and older buyers prefer the Navitimer. This points to a not so surprising trend we see across the board, with purchase prices increasing with age. Average sale price for the top 10 watches for 30-somethings is roughly $3,700, and for 40-somethings it increases to roughly $6,000. Let's talk about Rolex. We have the Yachtmaster 2 reference 116680 and the Yachtmaster 40 126621. Data says the young guns prefer the more compact Yachtmaster 40, while the old heads prefer the 44mm 116680. In fact, we see a near unanimous increase in case sizes with age. The average diameter of the top 10 watches for 30-somethings is 37.7mm. That's versus 41.9 for those in their 40s. Okay, let's switch it up a bit for the last matchup. We are pitting the modern Cartier Santos versus the IWC Pilot Chronograph Le Petit Prince edition. The data says younger buyers prefer the Santos and older buyers prefer the IWC. This reflects a few trends we're seeing, including brand preference by age bracket. Younger buyers tend to gravitate more towards Rolex, AP, Hublot, Cartier, Nomos, Omega, and Richard Mille. Older buyers, on the other hand, would rather buy Panerai, IWC, and dressier options like Blancpain, JLC, Chopard, Breguet, and Glashütte Original. Finally, let's zoom out to discuss global watch preferences, because it's a big world out there and not everybody likes the same stuff. We've rounded up data from 123 countries to see which watches buyers prefer in the East versus the West. Now, the US and Europe have similar buying preferences, but there are key differences when comparing to the US to Asia. Asia here includes major markets like Japan, Hong Kong, China, and Singapore. Let's start with the brands to see what's hot. Here's a breakdown of market share by brand based on Chrono24 data. You'll see a clear preference for dress watches in the collective Asian market. Breguet is seeing 111% more market share for Asian buyers versus US buyers. That jumps up to 139% for Girard-Perregaux. Piaget sits at 147%. Richard Mille at 186%. Chanel is at 190%. Bulgari at 194%. Roger Dubuis is at 234% advantage. Parmigiani Fleurier at 254%, and finally FP Journe with a whopping 287% more market share among Asian buyers compared to those from the US. Moving on to market share by seller region, we see that buyers tend to shop on their home turf. EU buyers purchase 90% of their watches from EU sellers. US buyers purchase 77% of their watches from the US, and with Asia, it's more evenly spread, but there's still a plurality of Asian buyers purchasing from Asian sellers with a market share of roughly 40%. Let's talk metal versus metal. As you might expect, a preference for dress watch brands among Asian buyers also translates to a preference for precious metals. Looking at the top three, we see 158% more market share for white gold, 163% more market share for platinum, and 274% more for red gold. For the last couple trends, we see a slight preference for watches under 40mm in diameter among Asian buyers. And price-wise, more is more, as the higher price segments are increasingly dominated by Asia. We're seeing 142% more for buyers in the 50 to 100K range, 139% more in the 100 to 200 segment, and 255% more Asian market share when we get above 200,000. Must be nice. There you have it, a snapshot of the secondary watch market for August 2022. Stay tuned for future episodes of Time is Money here on Chrono24, because time only moves in one direction, but the market does not. We'll see you next month. Be sure to like, subscribe, and as always, enjoy your watches.